I made a face at Olivia, but she thought I was being critical. And it was actually, I was amazed by the fact that...
Hey, Dave, I'm Barry's biggest fan. I think he's the most incredible songwriter.
She didn't respond right away. Not because she didn't hear him, but because for the first time in a long while, someone had said out loud the thing she was trying not to think. She smiled. She nodded. And then she went quiet. That moment stayed with her far longer than the conversation itself. But that wasn't the part anyone ever asked her about. If you care about the real stories behind the music, subscribe to RetroWaves. This channel is built for that. For most of her life, Olivia Newton-John was seen as untouchable, soft-spoken, radiant, someone whose presence felt calming even when she wasn't singing. People talked about her voice like it was sunlight. People talked about her smile like it was permanent. But what almost no one noticed was how carefully she avoided certain topics. Not interviews, not fame, not even illness. Loss. She would speak around it, acknowledge it gently, then redirect. And for years, no one pushed, because Olivia was a survivor, and survivors are expected to be grateful. But survival, she would later suggest, comes with a quieter cost. And that cost became impossible to ignore after a conversation with someone who understood it better than almost anyone alive. Barry Gibb. They had known each other for decades. Same era, same global spotlight, same strange experience of becoming famous young, then staying famous while the world changed around them. They weren't tabloid friends. They weren't constantly photographed together. Their connection was quieter than that, rooted in recognition. Barry once said that when he spoke to Olivia, it felt like speaking to someone who had lived the same life, just on a slightly different road. But there was something Barry carried that Olivia, for a long time, tried not to imagine. And when he finally spoke about it, it landed differently than he expected. Because Barry wasn't talking about success. He wasn't talking about awards, or charts, or legacy. He was talking about what happens after all of that stops mattering. He was talking about what it feels like to still be here. Olivia listened. She always did. But later she admitted that something about that conversation unsettled her in a way she couldn't shake. Not because of what Barry said, but because of what it implied, and because deep down she already knew it was true. For years, Olivia had been praised for her strength. She fought illness publicly, but gracefully. She turned pain into advocacy. She became a symbol of resilience. But resilience is often misunderstood. It doesn't mean the pain disappears. It means you learn how to carry it quietly. And Olivia carried more than most people realized. She watched peers fade away, artists she grew up with, friends she shared stages with, voices that once filled the same rooms she did. Each time she responded the same way, with grace, with softness, with a refusal to let bitterness show. But privately, something shifted, because surviving wasn't starting to feel like winning. And that feeling intensified after Barry shared what survival had done to him. Not in dramatic words, not in tears, in something far more unsettling, calm acceptance. Barry had lost his brothers, one by one, men who weren't just bandmates, but anchors to his entire sense of identity. And yet, there he was, still performing, still standing, still expected to celebrate a legacy that felt incomplete without them. When he spoke to Olivia about it, he didn't frame it as tragedy. He framed it as weight. The weight of being the one left behind. The weight of memories no one else could fully share anymore. The weight of knowing that every milestone now came with absence attached to it. Olivia didn't interrupt him, but she felt something tighten, because she recognized that weight, not from losing siblings, but from watching the world slowly empty around her. And for the first time, she saw her own future reflected back at her in someone else's eyes. She didn't talk about that realization publicly, not then. Instead, people noticed smaller changes. She became more selective with appearances, more private, more deliberate about where she gave her energy. She leaned harder into kindness, as if she understood that time was thinning, and still she avoided explaining why, because explaining it would mean admitting something that felt almost ungrateful, that sometimes survival feels lonelier than loss. And that truth, that quiet, uncomfortable truth, was the thing Barry gave her without meaning to. But that still wasn't the part that stayed with her the longest. What stayed with her came later, much later, after another loss, after another goodbye, after the silence between performances grew heavier than applause. It was then that Olivia finally revisited that conversation in her mind and realized Barry hadn't been warning her. He had been preparing her for a version of life where strength wouldn't be enough on its own, where surviving would require something else entirely. She didn't say this outright, she didn't dramatize it, but in rare moments of reflection, she hinted at it, that there was a point where continuing meant redefining what peace looked like, and that once you cross that point, you don't come back the same. But what exactly did Barry say that made her understand that? And why did she later admit that it changed how she saw everything that followed? That answer came quietly, and only after she had already carried it for years. It wasn't a dramatic confession. There was no moment where Olivia Newton-John stopped and announced that something had changed her forever. No headline, no revelation framed for attention. What she shared came quietly, almost unintentionally, the way people speak when they're no longer trying to protect themselves from difficult truths. She was asked once about loss, not illness, not fame, not legacy, just loss. And for a moment, she didn't answer right away, because loss for her had become layered, complicated, no longer something that could be traced to a single event. Then she said something small, that surviving long enough means you begin preparing yourself for silence. Not the silence of empty rooms, but the silence that comes when fewer people can finish your sentences. The silence of shared memories slowly becoming yours, alone. That was when the conversation with Barry returned to her. Not as a warning, not as advice, but as a truth she hadn't been ready to understand when he first said it. Barry never told her to be strong. He never told her that time would heal anything. Instead, he said something far quieter, something that didn't sound heavy at first, but stayed heavy once it settled. That eventually you stop mourning the people you lost and start mourning the version of yourself that only existed when they were still here. When Barry said that, Olivia didn't cry. She didn't respond with sympathy or reassurance. She simply nodded. At the time, she thought she understood what he meant. Years later, she realized she hadn't. Not fully. Because that sentence didn't explain grief. It explained transformation. It explained why survival, over time, begins to change how you experience joy. Why moments that should feel celebratory begin to feel quieter. Why applause can sound distant, even when it's loud. Olivia had spent decades being seen as a symbol of light, a comforting presence, someone audiences turned to not just for music, but for reassurance. And she carried that role with grace. But Barry's words forced her to confront a reality she rarely allowed herself to voice. That being the one who stays isn't always empowering. Sometimes it's isolating. Sometimes it's exhausting. Sometimes it comes with an unspoken expectation to keep representing hope, even when you're privately navigating grief that doesn't fade, only changes shape. Olivia had always believed in healing. She believed in optimism. She believed in forward motion. But what Barry gave her wasn't optimism. It was clarity. That healing doesn't restore what was lost. It teaches you how to live alongside the absence. And living alongside absence, she later admitted, altered her in ways she never fully recovered from. Not because she became sadder, but because she became more aware, more inward, more deliberate. She began choosing silence more often, not out of withdrawal, but out of respect for what she was carrying. Those close to her noticed the change. She became more selective with her time, more careful with her energy, less interested in revisiting eras that required her to perform a version of herself that no longer existed. She spoke less about the future, more about presence, more about now, because time, she understood, had begun to feel different, not shorter, but heavier. Survival, she realized, wasn't about endurance anymore. It was about meaning. Barry had found his meaning in memory, in carrying his brothers forward through music, in honoring them by continuing, even when continuing hurt. Olivia searched for hers elsewhere, in kindness, in gentleness, in choosing peace over performance. She focused on healing that didn't require explanation, on love that didn't need witnesses, on moments that felt real, even if they weren't public. But even in that peace, there was something she quietly acknowledged she never fully regained. Not happiness, not hope, but innocence. Because once you understand that survival can outlast joy, you don't move through life the same way again. She once said that gratitude and grief can exist in the same breath, that you can love being alive and still feel the weight of staying. That statement carried Barry's truth inside it. Not despair, awareness, an understanding that longevity isn't a reward, it's a responsibility to carry stories, to carry memory, to carry absence without letting it harden you. And Olivia carried it with remarkable grace. In her final years, she chose softness, she spoke gently, loved intentionally, let go of expectations that didn't serve her anymore. She wasn't afraid of endings because she had already made peace with the idea that survival doesn't mean escape, it means adaptation. Those closest to her noticed something else too. She wasn't chasing closure. She wasn't trying to make sense of everything. She was living alongside uncertainty and allowing that to be enough. Barry didn't give Olivia a sentence that broke her. He gave her permission to feel conflicted without guilt, permission to acknowledge that staying can be as complicated as leaving, permission to accept that strength doesn't always look like resilience. Sometimes it looks like softness. That permission stayed with her, quietly, permanently. By the time she reflected on it publicly, she wasn't asking for sympathy. She was offering understanding, a reminder that behind every legendary smile is a private reckoning, and that sometimes the most life-altering truths aren't spoken loudly. They're spoken calmly by someone who has already walked ahead of you. When Olivia spoke of Barry later, she didn't describe him as tragic. She described him as honest, and honesty, she learned, can be one of the heaviest things to carry. Because once you see life clearly, you don't get to look away again. But she didn't regret hearing it. She was grateful, because it allowed her to live the rest of her life with intention, with peace, with acceptance. And that is why, when she finally reflected on what Barry gave her, she didn't say it destroyed her. She said it changed her. And sometimes that change, the quiet shift you can't undo, is the hardest thing to recover from. If this story stayed with you, you already understand what RetroWaves is about. These aren't just songs, they're lives and the quiet truths that shape them.